Have you ever witnessed someone being judged unfairly, only for the truth to turn everything upside down? This story begins in a bustling high-end shoe store where appearances seem to matter more than kindness. A wealthy and arrogant store manager, full of confidence and entitlement, mocks a modestly dressed woman who comes in to return a pair of shoes. He assumes he knows her story, but oh, how wrong he is. As the manager's condescending words echo across the store, the woman stays calm, her quiet composure hiding something the manager would never expect. Just when the situation reaches its most uncomfortable moment, the store owner steps in, revealing a truth that will shock everyone present. What happens next is a lesson in humility, respect, and how appearances can be deceiving. Stay tuned, because this twist will leave you questioning everything you think you know about judgment and compassion. The store fell silent as the owner's voice cut through the tension. The manager's smug smile faltered, but he quickly masked it with a defensive laugh. Meanwhile, the woman stood quietly, clutching the shoebox as if it carried more than just shoes. It carried her story. She had walked into the store earlier that day, her clothes plain and her demeanor unassuming. The manager barely glanced at her as he attended to wealthier customers with exaggerated charm. When she finally approached the counter to return the shoes, his disdain was impossible to miss. "Don't tell me you bought these just to wear them and return them for cash," he sneered, loud enough for others to hear. But as the owner stepped forward, the manager's confidence wavered. Who was this woman, and why was she returning the shoes? The air grew thick with anticipation, as if everyone could sense that this wasn't just an ordinary exchange. The manager crossed his arms, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "So, what's the excuse? Wrong size? Didn't like the style? Or did you realize you couldn't afford them?" His words were sharp, meant to humiliate. A few customers glanced over, whispering among themselves, but no one intervened. The woman's hands trembled slightly as she set the shoebox on the counter. She opened her mouth to respond but hesitated, as if deciding whether it was worth explaining herself. The store owner, a reserved man who rarely stepped out of his office, studied the scene carefully. His eyes moved from the manager's smug expression to the woman's quiet determination. "Tell me," he asked her gently, "why are you returning these shoes?" The woman finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "They're not for me. They're for someone else. Someone who needs them more." Her words carried a weight that silenced the whispers. The manager scoffed, rolling his eyes, but the owner didn't react. Instead, he leaned closer, as though he already knew there was more to her story than anyone could imagine. The tension hung thick in the air, and the truth felt just out of reach, waiting to be uncovered. The manager laughed bitterly. "For someone else? That's convenient. Let me guess, you're just here to play the sympathy card. Maybe hoping for a refund and a little extra cash to go with it." His voice was loud, almost mocking, and the woman's face flushed, though she didn't look away. She carefully opened the shoebox, revealing a pair of pristine, unworn shoes. "They belong to my son," she said quietly. "He needed them for a job interview. I bought them, hoping they'd help him get a fresh start. But," her voice caught for a moment, and she steadied herself, "the interview didn't happen. I'm just here to return them. That's all." The manager raised an eyebrow, smirking. "Touching story, but we've heard them all before. Rules are rules. No refunds for worn shoes." The owner's expression darkened. "Enough," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the room. "Do you even know who this woman is?" The question hung in the air like a thunderclap, and the manager's confidence cracked. Customers began to murmur again, their curiosity growing. The woman looked surprised, unsure of what the owner meant. Everyone in the store was on edge now, waiting for the truth to come to light. The manager shifted uncomfortably, his smirk fading as the owner stepped closer. The room felt smaller now, the tension almost tangible. "What do you mean, do I know who she is?" the manager asked, trying to sound confident, but failing to mask the unease in his voice. The owner ignored him and turned to the woman. "Ma'am, would you mind sharing why your son missed his interview?" he asked gently, his tone full of concern. The woman hesitated, glancing at the curious eyes around her. After a deep breath, she spoke. He never made it there," she began, her voice trembling slightly. On his way, he saw a man collapse on the street. He stopped to help, called an ambulance, and stayed with him until help arrived. But by the time everything was over, he missed his interview. Her eyes welled up, but she quickly wiped away a tear. "He told me it was worth it because he might have saved someone's life." The store fell silent again, but this time the quiet wasn't filled with judgment. It was something else entirely. The manager opened his mouth to say something, but the owner raised his hand, stopping him. "And do you know who that man was?" The owner asked, his voice rising just enough to command attention. The woman shook her head, confused. The manager frowned, his impatience showing. "Does this story even have a point?" he muttered, but the owner's sharp glance silenced him. The owner took a step back, looking around at the gathered customers. "The man her son saved was me," he announced, his voice steady and full of emotion. Gasps rippled through the crowd as everyone's eyes darted between the woman and the owner. The manager froze, his face pale. "If it weren't for her son's kindness, I wouldn't be standing here today." The woman stared at the owner in disbelief, while the manager shifted nervously, realizing the situation was far bigger than he had ever imagined. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone, and the story was far from over. The woman's eyes widened as she processed the owner's words. "It was you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The owner nodded, his gaze steady. "Your son didn't just save a life, he saved my life. And I owe him, and you, more than words can ever express." The manager's confidence had evaporated entirely. "I didn't know," he stammered, his face flushed with panic. "I didn't mean any harm." But the owner's focus wasn't on him anymore. Instead, he turned back to the woman, his expression softening. "Ma'am, your son's selflessness is the kind of character we need in this world. And in this store," the owner said, "I'd like to offer him a position here, effective immediately. He's earned a chance to succeed." The woman's face lit up, her relief and gratitude clear. But before she could respond, the owner raised a hand. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice firm now as he looked at the manager. "Your behavior today has been unacceptable. This store is not just about selling shoes. It's about treating people with dignity and respect. You failed to uphold that standard." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Consider this your last day here." The manager's mouth fell open, but no words came. He grabbed his things and left without another glance. The room was quiet again, but this time, it was filled with an overwhelming sense of justice. The owner smiled at the woman. "Please tell your son to come see me. He deserves this opportunity, and so much more." As the woman thanked him through tears, the remaining customers clapped, their earlier curiosity replaced with admiration for the unexpected turn of events. But just as she was about to leave, the owner handed her the shoebox. "Keep these," he said. "No charge. Consider them a small token of gratitude for raising a son who knows the value of kindness." She smiled through her tears, and as she walked out, the store felt transformed. The people inside weren't just customers anymore. They were witnesses to a story they'd never forget, a story that reminded them all of the power of compassion. As the woman stepped out of the store, clutching the shoebox tightly, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The unexpected kindness of the store owner had turned what started as a humiliating experience into a moment of hope. She couldn't wait to share the good news with her son, a job opportunity that could change everything for their family. Inside the store, the atmosphere had shifted. The customers who witnessed the events seemed lighter, their faces reflecting a newfound appreciation for the simple acts of kindness that ripple far beyond what we see. The owner, now standing at the counter, looked around and spoke softly. "This is the kind of change we need more of, treating people with care, not judgment." And with that, the story ended where it began, with shoes. But these weren't just shoes anymore. They were a symbol of compassion, second chances, and the power of doing what's right.